Hello, this is how to install the macOS operating system in a QEMU virtual machine on Linux. I'm on Ubuntu 24.04. I searched on Google for Linux QEMU macOS. This is the second result that I get. Holia from github.com osx-kvm. The instructions are really short, and after about 1 hour you will have your macOS operating system virtual machine running in QEMU on Linux. This is the end result. This is the first time that the user has logged into the macOS desktop. Everything works as expected. Everything's snappy enough. Everything is usable, at least for instance, for developing software. Advanced features such as GPU pass-through, I did not test yet, but just creating a virtual machine, enabling the SSH server, enabling the VNC server connecting to the virtual machine using either OpenSSH or the QEMU virtualization software, or the VNC, using the VNC protocol works correctly. Everything is responsive, and it's enough for my use case. So now let's start following the procedure and install the QEMU virtual machine. So I have the documentation open in the half right of the screen, this web page. On the left half of the screen I have a terminal, and let's run the needed command lines. So it says that you should have at least Ubuntu 22.04, which I have. I'm on Ubuntu 24.04, 44-bit. So I have the needed versions for the packages. Then it says that I need to have at least SSE 4.1 and AVX2, which we'll check right now. So we need to look for SVM because I'm on AMD CPU. Let's actually run this command line. Okay, so the idea is to check that you have hardware virtualization, which is VTX on Intel CPUs and SVM on AMD CPUs. Even if you have these features in the CPU, in the central processing unit, most of the time these are disabled by default when you buy the computer. So you would need to restart your hardware computer into the BIOS UEFI, and in there find the way to enable all of the hardware virtualization features, so VTX, VTD, SVM, etc. And they're usually hidden all over the place in various versions of BIOSes from different versions, from different vendors. Let's now look for SSE4. SSE. So there's SSE 4.1, which is this one, the needed one. And other SSEs, SSE 3, SSE 4.2, SSE 4A, SSE, SSE 2. Okay, but the needed one is 4.1. Next up, AVX. I have AVX2, which is what's required. Okay, my CPU is this one, AMD 5750GE, which is a couple of years old. Unfortunately, the AMD website does not work right now for this CPU, but it says something like the year 2021. Contains a integrated GPU, 35 watt, 8 cores, 16 threads, AMD 4 motherboard. Okay, back to where we were. Modern AMD Ryzen processors work just fine even for macOS Sonoma. So I have no limitations regarding macOS versions and my CPU. My CPU is new enough to run all of the possible macOS versions. Next up, I'll need to install some packages. Okay, this fails because the package QEMU does not exist. The package QEMU is actually named I don't know how. But it's already installed, so I'll just not install that package. So remove QEMU from this list. Work Manager probably also depends on QEMU, so it will install it automatically. Work Manager is a graphical user interface application on top of QEMU. Okay, the installation is successful. Next up, we'll need to git clone this GitHub Git repository, and we're not going to get the history with git clone minus depth 1. Then change into the directory where we git cloned. And from time to time you should do git pull rebase. It's not the case, it's the first time that we are git cloning. And we'll need to do some changes to the hardware operating system installation. So we'll need to change the way the Linux kernel modules are loaded, and also additional settings related to the Linux kernel and KVM and support for macOS. First of all, we need to run this thing. What this does is in /sys, which is the Linux sysfs, for the module Linux kernel module KVM, sets ignore msrs, and we have applied this configuration just for this session. When we restart the machine, the setting will be lost. So we'll make it permanent by using the one of these versions for Intel CPUs or for AMD CPUs. So we're going with the AMD CPU. Like this. Let's actually see what's inside this file. Okay, so this same ignore MSRS, this part, and then additionally report ignored MSRS 0, so disabled, and nested virtualization for KVM AMD, probably. Next up, we're going to change the user groups of my current Linux user, which is named nmariusp. So let's run these 3 lines at once. Okay. Next up, we'll need to actually restart because we want this change to take effect and this change to take effect. I've already restarted, so let's prove that the changes took effect. Let's look at the list of Linux user groups that my user is member of. That's groups. So I'm part of the Linux user group input, libvirt, and KVM. Okay. Next up, we're downloading this file basesystem.dmg from the official Apple servers. I did another recording of a similar YouTube video where I install macOS on QEMU VM in Linux, but then the recommended version for macOS was Big Sur 11.7, so option 4. Now the recommended macOS version is Ventura 13. So I need to select 6 in here. Let's stick with the recommended because that has the greatest chances of actually us installing the macOS operating system correctly and then that the operating system runs correctly. Okay, so OS CDN, this is a content distribution network. So a network of servers from Apple company from where you can download the recovery image-based system DMG. Okay, this is the size of a CD-ROM. We did this step. We don't have a NVIDIA GPU. After it finishes downloading, we need to change the format of the file from basesystem.dmg to basesystem.img. So we'll be back in a second once it finishes downloading. The file basesystem.dmg has finished downloading. Let's convert it. So it says that it's decompressing it. DMG disk image. Okay, so there's a file basesystem.img and the file basesystem.dmg. Now we'll create an empty QCOW file. Compression type zlib. Okay, so it creates a file of type QEMU QCOW2 named mac hard disk ng.img, which can grow up to 256 gigabytes, which is a good size, and it's really small at the start. It's on NVMe, and this is probably the last command line that you need to run. From here on, you will be shown the boot loader, this graphical user interface bootloader where you can select from which medium to boot into. There's possibilities like UEFI or the hard disk or this basesystem.img file. And you should keep the default selection. Just press enter when you're presented with this screen. Let's figure out where this part is hidden. Could be under this or this. So the default selection was EFI, and I'm selecting macOS base system. We'll find out really soon if we have made the correct choice or not. I really needed to go into reset NVRAM or UEFI shell, so one of these two is the possibilities to get to the actual installer disk. Okay, so it got to this place, which is the actual installer. In here, we are told the following instructions that we should select the option disk utility in order to take the QEMU virtual hard disk. which is right now not allocated, doesn't have partitions, does not have a partition table. We should select the defaults in there in order to put a partition table and format that 250 gigabytes hard disk. So let's go disk utility, either double click or click on continue. And let's look at all of the possible disks. So this one is just 2 gigabytes, too small. This one is the right size, 250 gigabytes. This is 400 megabytes, so too small. This is the only possibility. QEMU hard disk media 250 gigabytes or around that. And we want to run the formatter, which is the button erase. It says erase and reformat the selected volume, container, device, partition map. We're keeping the default, so name untitled, format APFS. In here it says that we should keep the APFS file system. And the GUID partition map, this is GPT, GUID partition table. The text is a bit wrong, but it's the same thing. So the button to press is erase. Okay, it's really fast. Done. Now we can close the disk utility. So click on the main menu, disk utility, quit disk utility. And we're back at this list. In here, the option to select is reinstall macOS Ventura. Install a new copy of macOS Ventura onto your Mac. Double click. Okay. There's graphical user interface wizards guiding you all the way until you log into the macOS desktop for the first time using your user. And along the way, it will reboot, I don't know, 5 times. So this is the e1a. Agree. We want to select the 250 gigabytes, untitled, continue. Okay. We don't know exactly how much time it's going to take, certainly not 2 hours. And this progress is not that interesting to me. I'm not exactly sure when the installation has halted or what's really happening there. So I have the option from the main menu. We have window installer log, and we can move the windows a bit by dragging on the title bar. Okay, so I can see that it's still not done. Says estimated 50 minutes. That's more likely, but this should be the total time, not just at this install step, but also on the next ones. Okay. In here, we can select to not show only errors, but show all debug logs from this application install macOS Ventura. And we can see that it got to the step that takes the most time, which is started downloading package, which is a pkg, install assistant.pkg file, not a DMG, but a pkg. So we'll be back once it finishes downloading this file and finishes this wizard, this progress. So this is just a step in all of the installation steps in installing macOS. Just a page. Okay, so the file finished downloading. Can we see that? Okay, and this is the first restart. Okay, in here again, we should keep the default option. because the macOS installer is selecting the correct item to boot from in the bootloader menu. So just enter QEMU, click inside, and then press Enter key. Okay, at this point, something scary happens, is that PKG file that has been downloading is actually running, but it's not showing much information. It's not showing what it's doing. It's just this progress and some estimated time, but you really need to wait and let it do its thing. So you must have patience. So do something for 30 minutes and then be back. So waiting those 29 minutes has finished. The computer has restarted 2 times. And now it wants to boot into untitled data. So untitled is the name of the virtual hard disk. We kept the defaults. So just press enter. And finally, we're in the last parts of the installer wizard after a large number of reboots. In here, we're configuring the computer and the user, the macOS user. Okay, United States, English US, no accessibility. Don't migrate. No Apple ID. Skip. ULA. I agree. macOS username. Next up, location services. Don't enable continue. Don't use location services. New York. Don't share anything. No screen time. Default dark. Keyboard assistant. Press the key immediately to the right of the Shift key. Press the key immediately to the left of the Shift key on the right side. Correct. And this is it. We have managed to install macOS in QEMU on Linux. Let's see what extra steps we can take. In the wiki page, we can see that after the installation has finished, we can continue to run the installation using this same shell script, open core-boot.sh, or we could convert this QEMU installation in an XML file that's suitable for Virt Manager, and then we can add it to the Virt Manager software. So Virt Manager being this software. Okay, so it could appear in here as, I don't know, macOS. I'm not going to do this thing. Another option is this script, macOS headless, which let's actually compare the shell scripts that you can use in order to run the macOS virtual machine. So this is the Git repository. It has been git clone to ~osx-kvm, all uppercases letters. And I'm sorting by extension. There's boot macOS headless and the script that we have used until now, which is opencore -boot.sh. Let's compare those. So they're similar, but have a few changes. In a random access memory, there's more, which is this 6 gigabytes, whereas this is 4 gigabytes of RAM. One CPU, 2 CPU core, 4 CPU threads, so that's 4 vCPUs. And then the headless one has display none and enables VNC in KVM. So we can see in here various iterations of the script that boots the virtual machine as it evolved over time. So right now it can boot up to Sonoma, but not including Sonoma, because it says in here that you should change the CPU type from Panarin, which is really old CPU from Intel, to Haswell no TSX in order to be able to boot the latest version of macOS, which is Sonoma. So this thing you would want to replace with this thing. And we can see that the network interface card is Virt.io, which is the fastest possible, which is an evolution coming from VMX Net 3. And the graphics card is VMware SFGA, SVGA. It continues to have the install media base system IMG available in the bootloader. And it boots by default from the QEMU QCOW2 virtual hard disk with this option. And then it has TCP forward from the SSH port inside of the virtual machine to the local host port 2222. So that means that maybe you're successful and you can increase the amount of RAM if your hardware machine has enough, such as mine. I have 32 gigabytes of RAM, so I would allocate at least 10 gigabytes to the virtual machine. And then maybe you can increase the CPU type from Panarin to Haswell no TSX. And that maybe also allows you to increase the number of cores and threads. For instance, I would go with 4 cores and 8 threads. In the name, all of this in the name of speed, because I want to compile software in the virtual machine. Now let's shut down the virtual machine and make a backup of the directory, and then we'll start the virtual machine and see how it looks like in day-to-day operation. So let's shut it down. Shut down. Don't reopen Windows. Shut down. Okay, how do we do this? So you cannot copy a directory that has contents. You want the -R flag. It's going to take a while because there are large files in here. So there's the Mac hard disk, 35 gigabytes out of the 256 gigabytes maximum size. So this file will increase its size in time as you do more changes to your hard disk, as you install more applications inside of the macOS virtual machine. This is the compressed and this is the IMG base system file. It's always good after you install a virtual machine to do a snapshot or to make a backup copy of the virtual machine as it looked like when you finished installing. Because sometimes, you mess something up, you misconfigure something, and you want to not reinstall the operating system from scratch and wait 1.5 hours for the macOS installation to finish. And also the macOS installation might fail, like downloading some random file from the CDN might fail, and you would need to restart the entire installation process from scratch. Okay, so now we have a backup of this directory where we git cloned the Git repository. Let's see how we start the virtual machine. So we need to change into that directory /os xkvm, and then from here we run the script opencore boot sh. It wants to boot from the untitled disk, which is correct. It will boot after a timeout, 15 seconds or something. You can start the boot faster by entering the bootloader and pressing enter. While it's showing text and not in graphical user interface mode, QEMU window says that you should press Ctrl+G to release the mouse grab. But once it enters graphical user interface mode, like now, you can freely enter and exit the virtual machine. And that's it. Maybe it's a good idea to not upgrade to the latest version of macOS. So I would, in this case, disable the upgrade. The virtual machine seems to work okay. Everything seems to be supported for my use case, because I do not need sound. I do not need the GPU pass-through. I do not need USB pass-through. So everything is okay for my use case, except copy pasting and resizing the window, which I will accomplish by enabling the VNC server and connecting using a VNC client to the QEMU virtual machine. Let's see how we enable OpenSSH server. System settings. We search for share, and this page appears, sharing. All of these are disabled. I have enabled remote login, which is about SSH and SFTP, so the file transfer protocol and remote login from the OpenSSH project. The users that can use sudo are can already connect over SSH. So my user administrator is member of administrators and can connect remotely. And in the open core -boot.sh, we can see that it's using network interface card vert.io and has this port forwarding rule from the port 22 of the virtual machine, TCP, to the port 2222 on the hardware computer's local host. Okay, so with this enabled, we can now connect to the virtual machine. The syntax is SSH, the name of the user, at IP address, that's localhost, and then we need to specify the port. Okay, we connected. Here is the list of processes. Okay, next up, I want to enable the VNC server that's built into macOS operating system. That we do by enabling screen sharing. The same thing, so the users which are sudoers can connect using the remote desktop protocol. But since I'm using QEMU, not Virt Manager, I do not have any form of bridging or NAT network, so I'm not exactly sure how I'll be able to connect to the VNC server that's running on the QEMU virtual machine. For that, I'm going to do another TCP forward rule from the QEMU command line. The macOS web browser Safari has this issue where the content of the page is replaced with black. And the fix was to install the latest updates. So start the system settings application, you search for update. Do not install macOS Sonoma. Let's look at the settings. It says that updates are automatically downloaded but not installed, which is okay. And then in here it said other updates than macOS Sonoma. There was just one update available, and that was an update for the web browser Safari, and I have installed that update, and now it's working better. It's not showing that black screen anymore. So I want to connect to the virtual machine using a protocol such as RDP, Microsoft's Remote Desktop Protocol, or VNC, because I want to freely resize the window where macOS runs, and I also want to copy paste text from the host to the guest, so from the hardware machine to the virtual machine. For that, I went to System Settings. I searched for sharing. I have enabled screen sharing, and in order for VNC to work from my Linux machine, I needed to change the security to be the least amount of security. So instead of only these users, administrators, I went with all users. In computer settings, I went with anyone may request permission, and I need to put a VNC password. With that done, on the virtual machine on port 5900, the VNC server will be listening, and then I needed to forward that to my hardware machine. And I did that by copying the shell script that I use for starting the macOS virtual machine, which is named opencore-boot.sh to boot.sh. And in there, the port 22 has been, from the virtual machine, is being exposed as port 2222 on the hardware machine. And I'm doing the same thing for the VNC port. So 5900 on the virtual machine becomes 15900 on the hardware machine. Okay. Then I'm starting QEMU again. And now I can connect to the virtual machine using a VNC viewer such as Tiger VNC, which I needed to install. So apt search Tiger VNC. I needed to install this deb package Tiger VNC-viewer. The command line is sudo apt install Ctrl-Shift-V. This. Okay. After that, I'm reading the man page of VNC Viewer. This is the name of the executable that's provided by Tiger VNC Viewer. And the possibilities are the IP address. So the IP address would be the local host. And then the port, that's 15900. And that's about it. Clipboard copy paste of text is enabled by default. If the server supports it, resizing the VNC client will try to resize the virtual machine if possible, if the VNC server supports such a thing. So the command line is VNC viewer 127.0.0.1 colon 15900. And it asks for the password that I have set in system settings in macOS. And now what it does, it just duplicates. Where are you? It just duplicates whatever can be seen in the QEMU window in a worse way, because it shows to mouse cursors, for instance. But you still cannot, resizing the VNC client window does not resize the macOS, does not change its resolution. And also copy paste of text does not work. Let's try to copy some text. This text. And it doesn't work. So next up, what I'm trying to do is to install the disable the screen sharing protocol. So no support for RDP by default, such that the RDP server that's inside macOS doesn't listen on port 5900 by default, so the TCP port remains free. And then I'll try to see if for instance, Tiger VNC for macOS does have a server and if that thing does work. So for that, I'm searching on Google. How do you open a new tab? Okay, I went for tigervnc.org and says that downloads are available in GitHub release page. There's a macOS download available. Tiger VNC and extension DMG, 6 megabytes. Really small for a server client package. Okay, do you want to allow downloads? Allow. Open in Finder. It's a DMG. And it's just a viewer, there's no server. I know, maybe there's an RDP server. I don't know the solution to this problem. The fact that I want to easily resize the resolution of macOS and that I want to copy paste between Linux and macOS. Thank you. So I could make a copy paste of text work. Paste. Edit paste. Yes. So copy paste works and I'm using an IRD, so Apple Remote Desktop client for Linux, which is called the Remote Desktop Manager from Devolutions. So I searched on Google for a Apple Remote Desktop protocol, ARD client, and I found the one from Devolutions. The website is devolutions.net/remote desktop manager. And it has a free edition. The difference between the free edition and the team edition is that it supports shared databases and other features that I don't really want. I do not want to manage a fleet of computers. I do not want any enterprise features. I want just connect to one single remote computer, which is the macOS virtual machine. So it says that it supports remote connection management, password management, and it's cross-platform. That's very interesting. So I go to free download. It automatically selects the deb package for x64, which is correct. I have downloaded. And then I have installed the deb package. So this is how it looks like. And in order to install it, I have used the command sudo apt install /the deb file. So sudo apt install remote desktop manager .deb. And it needed to install 10 other deb packages. around GNOME keyring. I have accepted to install those deb packages, and then the executable is named remote desktop manager in a single word. Okay. Let's see if it appeared in the main menu. This one, remote desktop manager. Okay. Let's see how I edit this computer. So this is a manager of connecting to remote machines via multiple protocols. I don't really want the manager part. I don't want a multi-protocol part. I just want ARD and one computer. So I went to add session. In here I can select ARD, Apple Remote Desktop. Okay. Let's name this something, macOS. And Apple Remote Desktop. Host is the local host. And the port is the one that we have forwarded, which is 5900, but with a 1 at the start, so 15,900. Okay, I go add, and now I can connect to this thing. Right click, open session. Asks for a user and password. The user, my macOS user. And it can connect to the virtual machine. And again, copy paste of text works correctly. Not that convincing. Let's see more text. It did work the first time. Okay. So it kind of works. Okay. And I needed to configure the macOS installation in the following way. So go to System Settings. I needed to disable screen sharing and enable remote management. And that then at remote management, it copied over the settings from screen sharing, which is allow access for all users. And anyone may request permission to control the screen, and VNC viewers may control screen with password and then a password. So all of these settings have been copied over from screen sharing to remote management. Okay. The application, the viewer has just crashed. So all of these connecting remotely to macOS is still in its infancy from a Linux client and without using the official ARD client application from macOS. Thank you.